welcome to another segment of SDOH Field Guide presented by Advocate Advisors. I'm Michael Saller. The social determinants of health are being discussed everywhere right now, but there are a lot of people who still have questions about what that means and what to do about it. The Field Guide is a starting point for people to get quickly up to speed on social determinants of health and get their questions answered. If you have a question about SDOH to which you'd like to see a no-nonsense answer on air, please tweet it to SDOH Field Guide, and we'll try to get to it. Now, in past segments, we've explored the distinction between systemic and addressable social determinants. Systemic social determinants are things that are difficult to change, high-level policy questions. Addressable social determinants can be affected by targeted interventions on an individual's behalf. So today's question is, how exactly do SDOH interventions work? The answer to this question is tricky because there's so much innovation going on right now. You could ask 10 different intervention programs this question and get 10 pretty different answers. But if you step back and look at things from a distance, some patterns start to emerge. In fact, there seems to be a consistent progression taking place, where experimentation with early stages lead naturally to later ones. And that's not to say that any given stage is bad or wrong. In fact, each one has its own merits and can actually deliver some great outcomes. But it seems pretty predictable that once people gain experience with one stage, they graduate to the next. So it looks like the emerging best practice in social determinants interventions is one that combines all these stages into an integrated whole. So to make things easy, this week we've put together a bit of a cheat sheet. And what the guide will do is cover each stage at a high level, and then we'll later dig into each one on its own merit with its own segment. So let's get started. These are the 7 stages of SDOH interventions that we've seen. First, identification. Identification answers the question of who are we serving? After all, you got to have people to help, and they have to come from somewhere. By the way, the subjects of social interventions are called patients by the healthcare world and clients or individuals by the community organizations. So here at the Field Guide, we're going to try to use the term care recipient so that we can stay neutral to both sides. All right? Seems fair. Okay. Some programs ask care recipients to self-select, in other words, enroll themselves in a program, and other ones are dedicated to a specific cohort selected outside. We'll talk more about that in detail. Now, the second stage is called assessment. This basically addresses the question of what does a given care recipient need? People are different, and figuring out how to help them is the first step. Assessments range from informal to formal to super structured and can play a big role in analyzing the efficacy of outcomes. Next, resource directory. Basically, what we've got so far is we've identified somebody and a couple of their social needs. Now we have to find some people who can help meet it. Resource directories are basically lists of social specialists who are set up to be able to address a given social need for a given individual. For example, if one care recipient needs emergency housing, you might go to your resource directory to find a shelter for them for the night. There's a lot more to this stage, and people have dedicated an awful lot of effort to make it great. We'll cover all that in more detail later. Now, for a while, this is where the intervention process ended. You'd match a program with the care recipient, you'd print out or email some information, and that was where the process ended. But what people are realizing is that if you really want to get good health outcomes, you got to track what that social specialist did and whether it worked. So that brings us to referral tracking. This is basically what it sounds like. It's a way to record the social referrals you've made and close the loop on the original request to see whether it was fulfilled. In the past year or two, we've seen this going from nice to have to an absolutely must have when people are building these intervention programs. Next, information exchange. Now we're getting to the good stuff. So we've identified our recipients' social needs. We've matched them to resources who can help them, and we're tracking whether or not things are happening. That's pretty good. But everyone is still operating mostly in the dark. People are complicated, and social needs get addressed over time, not just in one referral, and usually by a number of specialists and providers collaborating with one another. So what people realize is that the more information you can share with the care team, healthcare, community organizations, care recipients, even their families and friends, the better the results are going to get. Now, sharing data like this is kind of tricky, but the investment seems to be totally worth it. And this is where a lot of these programs are starting to go. Next, Care coordination. This next stage is a bit controversial, and it comes down to this question. Can care recipients receiving social interventions manage them on their own, or is it better to have a quarterback? Many are finding that having someone viewing social interventions at a longitudinal level can help drive things forward and break log jams and solve problems that occur during the interventions themselves. Now, facilitating care coordination can be tricky, but it's not unheard of, even for self-directed programs, and in those that have done it, makes all the difference. Next, pathways. Okay, here's the cherry on top. People all agree that SDOH interventions work, but in the long run, for them to be truly mainstream, two things have to happen. The first is that interventions have to be proven, and second, repeatable. A pathway is basically a recipe for a social intervention so that the work that's being done is somewhat consistent and can be measured. So when you give people a consistent way to deliver a social intervention, it makes it much easier to figure out whether you're doing a good job or not, to be able to reproduce that work for other populations, to be able to scale up to large groups of individuals. And that's what pathways are. Some people call them blueprints, some people call them workflows. That's a pathway. And that's what we found. Put that all together, all 7 of those particular stages, and you have the makings for a great social interventions program. Feels like a lot, right? Well, the good news is that very little of this is groundbreaking. There are people who have done all of it, and technology that's actually out there that can help. In fact, many platform providers are actually pushing their products along these lines right now. Now, in the next few segments of the field guide, we'll dig into each of these stages in a little bit more detail to give some more information, so stay tuned. As always, if you have a social determinants of health question you'd like to see answered on camera, tweet it to @SDOH Field Guide. Once again, I'm Michael Sattler for Advocate Advisors. Thanks very much.